your hand using this small icon. And now let me introduce our first speaker. So Dimitri Papadopoulos is the Director of Decentralized Energy Solutions as well as Research Fellow in Imperial College London. His research focuses on modeling, analysis, and design of electricity markets at both national and local levels through the employment of optimization, theoretical, and reinforcement learning principles. So Dimitri, now the floor is yours. Okay, I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Yuting. Let me share again. Can you all see? Is it okay, Yuting?
Yes.
Great. So, good morning, everyone. Big thanks to the group in Louvain for inviting me to present our recent work in this area. I really hope we would have the chance to meet physically. Unfortunately, this is not the case. So, what I would like to do today, motivated by the fact that this session is on advanced analytics for distributed demand flexibility, I will not focus on one specific topic, but I will rather try to provide an overview of our recent research, basically our research in the last couple of years in Imperial College in this area. So a bit of the outline. I will start by setting a bit the context, things you probably all know, setting a bit the scene around decarbonization challenges and the emerging value of demand flexibility that this session is going to focus on today, and also the deregulation and trend of decentralization of electricity markets. And then I will focus on two specific challenges, if you like, around traditional analytical and modeling approaches around demand flexibility. One is the limitations in terms of scalability and privacy of traditional centralized coordination approaches. And the second one is the strategic behavior of large market entities, producers and retailers in the emerging imperfect market and what this entails around the value of demand flexibility. So in order to address these challenges, lately focused on, I would say, three different sets of analytical approaches. The first one will start from what we call decentralized and distributed coordination approaches for managing distributed demand flexibility. Second one is game theoretical and bi-level optimization approaches. And the last one I'm going to touch at the end is around reinforcement learning, which I think is a major theme in these energy days. I have seen a couple of presentations focusing on this type of methodologies. We are also using these approaches for analyzing market outcomes, considering the impact of demand flexibility. So starting from the overall context, we'll quickly go through that. As I'm sure you all know, the challenges. We are moving more and more to low carbon energy systems. And this decarbonization of the system entails basically two major challenges. On the one hand, we are integrating large amounts of renewable generation, wind and solar, which is not perfectly predictable and controllable. So balancing costs are expected to increase. And secondly, beyond basically 2020, we are moving in more and more countries to electrifying sectors of the demand side, such as transport, heating and cooling, which basically increases significantly the overall energy consumption, but more prominently increases the emerging demand peaks, entailing high capital investments for reinforcing the supporting distribution and transmission network. So considering both integration of renewables and electrification of demand sectors, a question of cost efficiency comes up. And demand flexibility has attracted a lot of interest, basically because it has been shown by various works that it can offer very significant value in reducing this cost, this emerging cost from decarbonization at various fronts in what is probably our most comprehensive work in this area in quantifying the overall value of demand flexibility. These are results from a report we did for the UK Committee on Climate Change 3 years ago. What it basically shows is that demand flexibility can offer economic benefits for the system at various levels, reducing operation costs by performing energy arbitrage and also providing various valuable balancing and frequency regulation services, but also in the long term reducing these capital investments in infrastructure, mainly associated with decarbonization of the demand side, by contributing to meeting peak demands, supporting the network, but also reducing the amount of low carbon generation we need to build in order to reach the desired carbon emission targets. So for the British system, basically the results demonstrated that the overall value of this distributed flexibility, if coordinated, of course, properly, can be between 4 and 8 billion pounds per year. So very, very significant value, depending on how aggressive we are regarding decarbonizing the system. So you can see for a CO2 target of 100 grams per kilowatt hour, the overall value is around 4 billion. If we go to a more aggressive target of 50 grams, then the value is doubled. So there are very significant benefits around mobilizing demand flexibility, which is really what the focus of this session today is. So there is obviously very big value, but the question is how do we coordinate distributed flexibility here? I think this is the theme and the focus of many of the presentations that we will hear today. And this is a big challenge for various reasons. We have a very large number of potential distributed flexible loads distributed in the system with their own complex time coupling and in many cases non-linear operating characteristics, and more importantly, operated and controlled by independent entities, by small, in many cases, independent consumers. So we have categorized broadly the approaches to coordinate distributed flexibility in 3, if you like, categories or types. The first one, the simplest one, the most traditional one, probably is centralized, what we call centralized coordination. So we collect the technical and economic parameters and characteristics of the different types of distributed flexible loads in to a central point, to a central, if you like, coordinating entity, which solves a global optimization problem at this central point and dispatches the distributed flexible loads accordingly. So from a theoretical point of view, this provides the optimal solution for the whole system. However, in practical terms, there are many challenges, communication costs, computational scalability, privacy concerns raised by the owners of these distributed resources, as mentioned before. So in this context, there have been efforts to come up with alternative approaches to avoid this centralized control. And there are 2, if you like, families of approaches in here. The first one corresponds to decentralized coordination approaches. The most representative example is price-based coordination, or what we call dynamic pricing, where basically we still have a central entity, but this central entity does not have explicit knowledge of all the technical and economic parameters of the various distributed flexible loads. It designs suitable time variable price signals, transmits these price signals to the flexible loads, and then they also have some intelligence at the local control point to respond to this dynamic price. So by doing that, we somehow decentralized, if you like, the coordination burden to also include active engagement by the different consumers. And the last one, which has attracted lately a lot of interest because of the emergence of new trading concepts, peer-to-peer trading concepts, local energy markets, etc., is fully distributed coordination, where we completely avoid the existence of a central entity. So the coordination the coordination task is carried out only through the bilateral exchange of information among the controllers of the flexible loads. Both of these families of approaches, the centralized and distributed coordination, have attracted a lot of interest lately. However, there are significant issues around their application, mostly associated with their capability of reaching a feasible and optimal, from the global perspective, solution for the whole system. The first example behind these challenges, it has been well documented in the literature over the past few years. This has actually been also my PhD topic a few years back, is around the challenges of price-based coordination. So if you employ dynamic pricing to coordinate a large number of distributed flexible loads, and if we assume that this distributed flexibility will be controlled in an automated fashion, since consumers are not, of course, willing and able to be physically engaged in the coordination process, then what happens is that we get this demand response concentration effect, or loss of diversity effect, where basically the response of the flexible load is concentrated at the periods of the lowest prices. So if we assume in here, for example, that these periods are periods in the night where we usually have the lowest demand in the day, then their response, and we have shown it here through two simple simulation examples with two different types of flexible loads, smart charging electric vehicles, and wet appliances with deferrable cycles. You tend to have these new prominent demand peaks at what used to be the off-peak demand periods. And this concentration effect is aggravated if you have a higher number, higher flexibility, and lower diversity of these flexible resources. What you can see in the lower graph, for example, this is a case, as mentioned before, with wet appliances. Their flexibility is captured by this parameter delta in here, which is the extent to which we can delay their operation cycles. So higher delta implies that we have more flexibility in moving their operating cycles across the day. So more of them have now the capability of responding by carrying out their cycles at the period with the lowest prices. So in order to deal with this demand response concentration effect and this loss of diversity, there are many different schemes, what we call smarter pricing strategies in here to avoid that. One example has been imposing flexibility restrictions to prevent the loads from concentrating the demand at the lowest price periods. In the case of electric vehicles, for example, in here, this flexibility restriction is applied on their maximum charging rate. So we reduce proportionally the maximum charging rate to an extent that this concentration is avoided. A second approach has been to, instead of imposing a hard flexibility limit, to apply a flexibility price, or as we call it usually non-linear price, to demotivate this concentration effect. In this example of electric vehicles in here, what we had done in the past, for example, is applying a quadratic price, a price penalizing the square of the response, of the charging response of the electric vehicles, which implicitly demotivates them from concentrating the response at a single time period. And finally, one example that has also attracted a lot of interest is applying randomized prices. So we apply different, slightly differentiated prices to different loads in the system in order to effectively diversify the response and avoid, again, this response concentration effect. And what some of our previous work has shown is that this price randomization is particularly useful in cases of flexible loads that exhibit discrete characteristics, like discrete power cycles, which is the case, for example, with wet appliances. In such loads with discrete characteristics, uniform, if you like, strategies such as imposing a uniform restriction or a uniform nonlinear price does not always resolve the problem. We need some type of diversification, and this price randomization is a diversification strategy that is commonly employed. Beyond decentralized coordination, as mentioned before, there has been a lot of interest in fully distributed coordination, where there is no central entity. The whole coordination task is carried out by the distributed resources through the bilateral exchange of information. And the one that has attracted a lot of interest lately is consensus-based algorithms. That basically the idea is to have the different agents, the different distributed resources in the system negotiating around certain consensus variables until they have reached a consensus, basically an agreement around the value of these variables. So the basic structure of such consensus-based algorithms includes three steps beyond the initialization. So each distributed resource first performs a price update. So it updates its price estimate. What is the estimate for the clearing price in the local coordination problem based on its neighbor's estimates and a correction term proportional to the mismatch estimates. Secondly, it performs response optimization by solving its own scheduling problem based on the price estimates. And finally, it also performs a mismatch update by, again, updating its mismatch estimates based on the neighbor's information, and again, a correction term, which is given by the difference between its optimal responses at the two most recent iterations. And at the end of these three steps, we check for termination if we have converged basically to a stable solution. So without going too much in the details, this has been, if you like, the state-of-the-art consensus-based approach. And it has been shown in previous work that this approach converges after a limited number of iterations to a feasible and optimal solution. But this work has not considered so far the time coupling properties of flexible demand and also energy storage. So what we have done in some our previous work, we have applied this same state-of-the-art consensus-based algorithm in a case where the distributed resources coordinated also include resources with time coupling characteristics, such as flexible demand and energy storage, which, as you all know, exhibit this time coupling. They basically need to recover, if you like, their energy levels or recover the level of service in the case of flexible demand. Usually a load reduction is followed by what we call a load recovery effect. So this time coupling, when introduced to this consensus-based coordination algorithm, we have demonstrated that it leads, as you can see in the graphs, the upper side of the slide, to oscillatory behavior. So these are all, if you like, the consensus variables in the problem, the price, the power response of the different resources, and the mismatch estimate by each resource. So we can see an oscillatory behavior and lack of convergence. And this effect, this failure to converge is caused in here by discontinuities in the responses of flexible demand and energy storage. So we have in here a simple example to demonstrate that two time period example, where basically we show that in the response of flexible demand, there is a discontinuity at the point where the prices at the two periods are equal. In other words, if the price at one period is marginally lower than the price in the second period, then we will tend to have concentration, the same concentration effect we previously demonstrated in the centralized coordination schemes. We will have the same effect in here, and this in here leads to lack of convergence. So by adapting the same logic as in the previous work, the previous slides, we introduced in here this relative flexibility restriction, which basically penalizes, not penalizes, it limits proportionally the maximum demand of flexible demand and energy storage resources through this relative limit alpha in here. And this limit, following the logic of consensus-based algorithms, it also constitutes a consensus variable for the problem. So it is negotiated among the different distributed resources based on this update algorithm that we have proposed, where the values of this additional consensus variable is updated based on the neighbors' estimates, and a correction term which is now proportional to the absolute mismatch estimate. So the idea, the logic behind this proposal in here is that if we have a higher absolute mismatch estimate, this implies that we are further away from convergence. So we need to further limit this time-coupled response of flexible demand and energy storage, reduce these lumpy shifts, if you like, across different time periods in order to avoid the oscillatory behavior and at the end converge. And we have shown both through case studies, but also proven theoretically in this latest work that this algorithm, first of all, converges to a fixed point. This solution after converging is feasible, meaning that all the demand-supply mismatch estimates converge to zero. And finally, that it is optimal, meaning that it provides the same coordination solution with centralized coordination that maximizes basically overall social welfare in the system. That's that closes the first part that I wanted to discuss today. But beyond the topic of coordination of decentralized and distributed approaches for mobilizing demand flexibility. Another big topic, another big area that we have done a lot of work in Imperial is basically how demand flexibility is participating in emerging electricity markets, and particularly focusing on the topic of strategic behavior and market power. As you know, despite the fact that competition has been introduced in the last 3 decades almost across the world in generation supply sectors, still in most countries we have a small number of large players in both wholesale and retail markets. And as a result of this, if you like, imperfect competition, market power effect emerge. So we need to move away from traditional, again, models that assume perfectly competitive behavior and aim at maximizing welfare, to models that can capture this strategic behavior of self-interested players attempting to maximize their profit strategically. So in this context, the most traditional approach in the last 2 decades, really around modeling imperfect markets and strategic behavior, has been bi-level optimization. Bi-level optimization can be seen also as a Stackelberg game, as you may know. So when, for example, we model imperfect competition in the wholesale market, what we do is that we model the decision-making of a big strategic player, such as a big generation company, at the upper level, and the competitive market clearing process carried out by the market operator at the lower level. These two problems are coupled because basically the strategic player at the upper level affects the lower level one by the strategic bids here, and the lower level provides as feedback the clearing dispatch and prices that basically affect the calculation of the strategic player's profit. So the traditional approach in addressing these problems has been to convert the bi-level problem to a single level equivalent, what we call imperfect problem, by transforming the lower level problem to its equivalent KKT optimality conditions and inserting these conditions as constraints to the upper level one. And by following that modeling framework, our first, if you like, analysis in here had been what is the value of demand flexibility in such imperfect wholesale market. So what we have previously shown is that by enabling flexible demand to participate in such imperfect wholesale markets, we can substantially reduce the extent of market power exercised by large generation companies. So these graphs show, for example, different scenarios around the extent of flexibility, to what extent we can shift, move around, if you like, demand across a day. And this increasing demand flexibility leads to a flatter demand profile, as you can see in the top graph. And the lower graph shows a metric of market power, basically. So what is the extra profit that the generation side can achieve by behaving strategically, by not reporting their actual costs in the market? What we can see is that there is this prominent market power exercise effect during peak periods where competition is lower, the system is more stressed. And demand flexibility is particularly valuable by reducing demand at these periods. It reduces substantially, the extent of market power that can be exercised even by reducing the demand at a limited scale. So, however, this exercise has assumed that flexible demand can directly participate in the wholesale market. As we know, this is not realistically the case. In most cases, especially for small domestic consumers, for distributed flexibility, the way they participate in the market is through a retailer or a supplier. Basically, this supplier buys energy from the wholesale market based on variable prices and then resells this energy to the flexible consumers based on less variable tariffs. So in order to capture these dynamics, we have developed an alternative model still based on bi-level optimization principles, but the logic is a bit different. We model at the upper level, again, a strategic entity. In this case, it is not a generation company. In this case, it is a strategic retailer. But now this strategic retailer interacts with two instead of one lower level problems. On the one hand, on the left-hand side, it interacts with the consumers by transmitting the time dynamic potentially retail prices and obtaining as feedback the demand response from the consumers. And on the right-hand side, it also interacts with the wholesale market, because this is where the retailer buys energy from. So it bids at the wholesale markets, and as feedback, there is the clearing dispatch in the wholesale. So overall, by developing this model, what we could capture is the implicit effects of demand response on both retailer strategies and the wholesale market. Because what happens in here, as mentioned before, in most countries, we still have a small number of retailers sharing the overall number of consumers in the system. For example, in the UK, we still have the so-called Big Six retailers serving more than 80% of the total population. So because of this large size of each retailer, its pricing strategies, its retail pricing strategies will affect, of course, the demand response from the consumers, but because they then need to buy this energy from the wholesale market, this demand response will implicitly affect also the conditions in the wholesale market. So we capture through this modeling approach both the interaction of the retailer with both the consumers and the wholesale market side. And what we, some of the points of our analysis by using this model was first that as we increase, you can see here we have different cases again around demand flexibility. If in the case where we don't have demand flexibility, the blue case, this demand flexibility is basically zero. What the retailers tend to do in the lower graph is offering high retail prices during peak periods, low prices during off-peak periods in order to overall maximize their revenue. As we start increasing demand flexibility, the consumers can now respond to these variable prices by shifting demand from peak to off-peak periods. The retailers now, through this model, anticipate this response, and they tend to flatten the price offered, which basically means that their potential, the strategic potential of manipulating the consumers is reduced. On the other hand, at the wholesale side of this interaction, we still have the effect discussed before. So because the retailer is large enough, the wholesale demand and prices are also reduced during peak periods. So what happens overall if we analyze the business case for this strategic retailer in here? We have basically explored in this latest paper, we did different scenarios regarding demand flexibility and the retailers' overall share in the market, how big they are with respect to the total population of served consumers. And there are some interesting results. I'm not going to go all the details now, but it is interesting to see that there is a uniform trend on both revenue and cost reduction. So the revenue for the retailers is reduced because of flexibility. The cost in the wholesale market is also reduced. So there is a mixed trend around the net profit, which depends on various factors, such as the specific extent of flexibility and their size in the market. And some of these results are presented in this latest paper. The final thing, and I will close with that, is, as mentioned before, so far, the approach we have been using to analyze these strategic interactions between different market entities has been by level optimization. However, we have in the last few years analyzed cases where by level optimization may not always be the right approach. There are two fundamental limitations. The first one is that the transformation of the bi-level problem to an MPEG problem is only possible if the lower level problems is convex. So this introduces questions of what happens if we have non-convex characteristics at the lower level, for example, the unit commitment characteristics of the generation side in the wholesale market model, or discrete characteristics such as discrete power levels at the demand side. And secondly, that it assumes knowledge of the parameters and the decision-making of entities at the lower level problem. It assumes that the upper level entity has full knowledge of the computational algorithm and the operating parameters of the entities interacting in the lower level problems. So in this context, we have been working with two, if you like, different sets of approaches to address these challenges. The first one is an analytical approach. We basically did some work last year on the problem of strategic bidding of large producers in the market, where we try to address this problem of non-convexities in the lower level problem of the overall coordination by adopting this relaxation and duality gap analyzation approach. So the logic was really instead of deriving the exact KKT conditions of the lower level, to first relax this lower level problem, obtain its dual, and then penalize the duality gap in order to address the efficiency effects of this relaxation. And the second approach that we have been also lately focusing upon is reinforcement learning. With reinforcement learning, the good thing is that the lower level problem, if you like, can be as complex as you like, so we can deal with any types of non-convexities and non-linearities. And also that we avoid this problem of having the upper level problem entity relying on knowledge, on explicit knowledge of the lower level. With reinforcement learning, this doesn't happen because simply we do not transform, if you like, this two-level problem to a single equivalent problem, but we rather solve the whole coordination exercise in a recursive fashion. We have agents. Here they are strategic entities, such as the strategic retailer mentioned before, gradually learning through repeated interactions with the environment, in other words, the lower level problems, what are the optimal policies to exercise in order to maximize its net profit. And there have been a lot of alternative reinforcement learning approaches in the literature, such as Q-learning, deep Q networks, etc. I'm not going to go to the details. In some of our latest work, we basically compare the effectiveness of these alternative approaches to the problem of a retailer maximizing its net profit by interacting with smart charging electric vehicles. That's all from my side. Just copied in here some of our previous work as references to some of the points I discussed. And let me just say at the end that something around our current work. There is also, as you probably know, a big interest lately on local energy systems, local energy markets, systems that can enable this peer-to-peer and distributed energy trading that we discussed before, but at the same time also offering valuable flexibility to different levels of the system, for example, to the DSO and the ESO. So in this context, we have lately obtained an Innovate UK project called Liverpool Multi-Vector Energy Exchange, where we try to design such a local energy market at the city scale in Liverpool. And there are some key challenges, and I wanted to highlight this because I found this very relevant to some of the topics in the following presentations today, such as how we deal with distribution network constraints, market problems, and also aligning the ESO and DSO flexibility products requirements in order to enable this value provision by local systems to different levels of the electricity chain. So very much looking forward to those. And by that, I will close and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dimitris. So I think we can have 5 minutes Q&A from the audience. If you raise your hand, I will let you speak and probably cite your institute.
Yeah, maybe I will start, Dimitrios. Thanks for the presentation. I had a question on the modeling. So you are modeling the problem in a decentralized fashion. And for modeling your bi-level problems, but then you solve it using a centralized method, right? When you reformulate it as an MPEG. And I was wondering if there is a way to solve this problem decentrally or not.
Yeah, so I mean, in what I presented, there are these two different types of approaches, because with the first one, we try to avoid these scalability limitations of centralized control, as you mentioned, while in the second one, we're mostly analyzing strategic interactions in imperfect markets. So in this second one, as you correctly mentioned, the approach at the end is to solve this problem centrally by adopting this MPEG analytical approach. You are right that we are moving towards dealing with such strategic interaction problems and solving them in a distributed way. One of the approaches we are looking currently is multi-agent reinforcement learning, or multi-agent deep reinforcement learning, where intelligence, if you like, in decision making is spread among multiple agents and not by having a central entity deciding on the actions of all the coordinated entities. And I think there are some challenges there, because as you may know, with reinforcement learning, and especially with multi-agent reinforcement learning, you do not have any guarantees on convergence and optimality. Plus, the computation burden increases, especially in cases where the reinforcement learning model is trained with data of limited accuracy, because in reality you train a reinforcement learning model, but then when you apply it in the real applications, you may observe conditions that you have not used at the training stage. So there are some challenges there, but as you correctly said, we are moving towards this direction.
All right, thanks, Dimitrios.
So we have Jill from GE. Go ahead, please.
Yes, hello. This is Amrit from GE in France. So I don't have a question on optimization itself, but maybe a bit high-level question. So I understand that there are two use cases for the flexibility. One that can be the decentralized trading between different prosumers, I would say. And the idea, if I understand right, there would be that prosumers want to reduce their imbalance, or I would say they want to balance their positions as much as possible, knowing that they are acting individually in the market. There's no retailer or there's no supplier on top of them. They are individual participants to the market. Why not? Okay. Then there's a second use case where a retailer or a higher level entity, maybe an aggregator, is providing these flexibility services to maybe a TSO or a DSO. Then my question is, how much it is possible that these both type of models can exist together, and what are the, maybe if you want to go into a bit more detail, what are the timelines for the execution of first model and then the second model, or they can exist parallel with one another?
Yeah, it's a big question. I'm not sure I can manage to respond to all of that comprehensively in a minute, but you know, as you mentioned, and this is really what we are trying now to do with this new research project. As you said, there are two levels of coordination in here. One is the local, you can say, energy trading or imbalance management within the boundaries of the local system. And the second is the coordination with entities outside of these boundaries, such as the retailer that I also discussed before, but also DSOs and ESOs, because they are now procuring in most countries flexibility products in a market-based fashion. So yeah, there is the locational aspect in here. There is also the temporal aspect that you mentioned. So in what horizons and resolutions we coordinate all these different types of energy and flexibility trades. There is overall, just to provide a high level answer to your latest point, there is a movement towards harmonizing flexibility products for both transmission and distribution levels to be procured on a day ahead horizon in Europe. So this, I think, is a big change, because some of this was procured at much longer horizons, week ahead or months ahead. So there is a movement to go for all services to a day ahead horizon. For the temporal resolution, if this is also included in your question, in most cases, at least in the UK, these products for distribution and transmission are procured on a half-hour basis. However, in the local energy system, we potentially need to balance, if you like, the local trades at much finer resolution. So the overall vision, and I agree with some of the comments you made, is to enable this, if you like, co-optimization or coordination of local trades and external flexibility trades through a common market clearing process, if you like. That's the vision, at least as we see it now in this project, to sort of have a combined energy and flexibility clearing in a similar way as we have combined energy and reserve clearing, for example, in national markets in the US.
Okay, thank you.
Let's take another one from Asna of Acer.
Yes,
Please
thank
go
you
ahead.
very much for the interesting presentation. I have only two questions on the previous slide on the introduction of the bi-level optimization problem. The first one, just to understand the second the second lower level problem. You mentioned that the objective function is the minimization of the generation cost. I just wanted to understand if the demand bits that are input to this problem are also included in this objective function.
Yeah, no, you are right in here. It's probably by mistake. This can also be in general maximization of social welfare. So in general, we include in here both generation offers and demand bids.
Okay, and then the second question. So even in the multi-agent simulation, I guess each agent would represent would solve the decision making, let's say strategy optimization, but then you would still need to centrally solve the wholesale market, right? You don't use agent for that. Okay, great.
Yes. I mean, the overall idea, I mean, depends on from which perspective you are seeing the problem, but the overall idea, especially in this new concept of local energy markets, is to organize, if you like, trades in a market-based fashion at the local level, but still there will be interaction with the external markets. So the internal, if you like, prices for energy or flexibility will obviously depend on the external ones, and this is, I think, one of the main challenges as we go forward.
Thank you very much.
Gilles Bertrand, do you have a quick question?
Yes, so my question is about the reinforcement learning approach that you've been using. So you mentioned that it's difficult to get convergence guarantees, but I've seen in some of your work that you basically show that you are converging to a Nash equilibrium. So can you a bit explain what is it due to the structure of the problem? Or can you, because you
with
a priori, but that's what you observe. So
converging to Nash equilibrium with reinforcement learning, you said. I didn't get that point. So you mentioned reaching a Nash equilibrium.
Yes. So
by employing reinforcement learning.
Yes. Basically, in theory, when you apply it, you don't have guarantee that you will converge to a Nash equilibrium, but it seems that empirically that you've obtained it in some situations.
I'm not sure if you refer to the slides or to some paper.
To some paper that you've shown.
No. So far, anyway, in what we have published so far in this area, we have used reinforcement learning to optimize the decision of a single entity. So we have not looked at cases where multiple agents interact by using reinforcement learning. We are working on this now, but we have not previously worked on this problem. And, you know, we cannot basically, we have not shown, I think, that with multi-agent reinforcement learning, you can reach a Nash equilibrium. And even in the problems with a single entity, still we are not proving optimality for this single entity. We are just empirically comparing with the profit that emerges for this entity with an analytical approach in order to do the comparison. I highly doubt that there is a way of proving or theoretically demonstrating at least that you can reach a Nash equilibrium with reinforcement learning, no matter how good the reinforcement learning approach is. We're working towards that direction, but no, we have not reached such conclusions yet.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Demetrius. Now let's turn to the second presentation. Next presentation will be given by Leonardo Mills. He is a professor at the Valeric Business School and the Florence School of Regulation. Please.
Yes, thank you. Let me just wait until Dimitris stops sharing the screen. Yes, thank you. So I'll launch my presentation. So I saw that very nicely Anthony organizes a full conference to celebrate 3 PhDs. So I thought, okay, why not use this opportunity here to make a mini celebration of PhDs I worked with recently within this bigger celebration in Louvain. So on the left, you see Tim, who already finished his PhD, so he's a former PhD researcher, and the other 3 are still ongoing PhDs. And they all connect with the topic of my presentation, which is on the future of electricity markets with distribution network constraints. This is a big topic, but in the PhD work we are currently doing as a team, we sort of see it in 3 subtopics that you see on this slide, and with each subtopic we have several publications associated, and I thought to use this presentation as a kind of a teaser for you to get to know our work, both on distribution tariffs, because of course that's where we can signal distribution network constraints, but I think everybody's already convinced that we won't be able to have perfectly cost-reflective tariffs. So that's why we are also looking more and more at this trade-off between distribution network expansion and flexibility contracting that I think also Dimitris already referred to. And if we really go in the direction of flexibility contracting, then the next question is the third topic. How do we then procure this flexibility in the existing sequence of electricity markets that we have in Europe? And so I use this also as the storyline for my presentation. So first, the PhDs of Tim and Niels were on tariffs. And on the left, you see the kind of issues I bumped into when talking to stakeholders, regulators, DSOs, but also when looking at the literature that existed 4 years ago. So the first thing that struck me is that most of the models that were being used in the literature were, starting from fixed consumer profiles, and then we're saying, if we would change the tariff from volumetric into capacity, what would that imply for different consumer groups? But of course, we know that consumer groups will change their profile depending on the signal they get, especially now with prosumers and all the possibilities you have at the household level. So very soon we came to the conclusion that this could be a new area to apply bi-level models, and 4 years ago there were not many people doing that, and so Tim was brave in going in that direction. We set up a relatively simple model so we could really understand what was going on within the upper level a DSO, and in the lower level 2 types of consumers, the real consumers, the passive ones that for all kind of reasons do not invest in storage or PV, and then these prosumers that would be perfectly rational investment decision makers. Then Niels added to that model by saying, okay, but in that upper level, most of the literature takes a relatively simple, including Tim, took a quite simple function, an investment function, assuming that distribution investments are linear and that we know more or less the cost, which is, not always the case, because it's much more of a stepwise investment. And it's also a multi-stage decision, right? So we're taking investment decisions every year or every few years. And then we reevaluate these decisions for a new horizons. So that's what we've done on the modeling side. How did this connect with what is going on in practice? Well, you probably noticed that DSOs have been advocating for capacity tariffs. And one of the first things we did is to show that capacity tariffs are not necessarily the solution to all problems, especially if you are in a situation with a lot of sunk costs. they might not be the right way to go, because then you would give a very strong signal to reduce peaks. But if all your costs are sunk, this peak reduction is not going to result in any cost reduction, right? So it really depends on the state of, and that can be different in different countries. So the way the regulator in the UK looks at it is that they more and more talk about, on the one hand, to have residual charges within distribution tariffs, and then on the other hand, to think about forward-looking charges. And the relative size of these charges depends on the state of the grid. Another thing we've noticed in our work is that you always have to consider that capacity tariffs are often implemented in a simple way, and the simple way is to look at individual peaks, but then we know that individual peaks are not always aligned with system peaks. So again, we might be overcharging people for having high individual peaks, because some of these individual peaks don't cause any system costs. So then we should not necessarily penalize them, right? And that's very hard to do by a lot of location granularity. And if you don't have that granularity, again, you might want to be careful in giving too strong capacity signals. Then we also had a pleasure of interacting with consumer organizations represented in Europe by BUC. And they were really concerned at some point about, if you apply residual charges to allocate some costs, the theory will tell you that you should use fixed charges, so everybody pays independent of their consumer profile. Just having a connection triggers this kind of contribution to the costs, the historical costs. But yeah, if you're then a very small consumer, you pay a lot, right? So fixed charges could really result in kind of redistribution effects that are maybe not ideal. So we looked at it again with the modeling, but turns out that it's really hard to have charges that are both cost reflective and fair. So we sort of came to the conclusion that if you really want to reach fairness, better to do it with other measures. And we've seen it in Belgium. You can try to tax prosumers in a way, or you can try to have other support for more vulnerable consumers, not necessarily integrated within distribution tariffs. Another interesting element is, I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago, the European Commission started to, within the clean energy package, say maybe we should harmonize distribution tariffs, because in the end, if a lot of resources are connected to distribution level, market access is determined by distribution tariffs. So maybe if they are very different, this would have an effect on the market and where people locate, and maybe not having a level playing field anymore for the competition between different assets. And then we looked at that, and this was done by the work of Niels. And we did find that in some cases you can have these spillover effects, but they do not necessarily have to be negative. So actually, if your neighboring country is having distribution tariffs that gives overinvestment or implicitly subsidizes PV, your neighbors might actually profit from that, right? Because they will get access through the internal market to that cheap PV that they didn't have to subsidize. So that's a nice example of positive spillovers via distribution tariffs. So I knew in Louvain you are very good at modeling, so I thought let's share also with you that I sometimes also think that these kind of models can be really beautiful. And we noticed that for the first time in a paper by with Tim, where we saw that if you do bi-level modeling, you are modeling the non-cooperative prosumer behavior. And we did see non-cooperative equilibria, and quite interesting ones that we didn't expect to have, because the first time we saw these results, we actually thought we had a mistake in the model. So it took us a while to realize that that is really possible, because I don't want to explain all the details in this graph, but I want to point you to the green curve. So the green curve is the reactive consumer. So you would normally expect that a prosumer invests in PV and batteries, right, at home. to reduce the prices, the cost they get, right? So, and you see that also on the left, that indeed, if there are net metering, volumetric charges, then this reactive customer is always having a reduction of cost. With a reference scenario where they don't invest in PV and battery. So they do invest in PV and battery, and it's and they benefit from that. So they even not only contribute to the reduction of system costs, they also push certain costs towards the passive consumers. That's why the red line on the left is going up so strongly. So what you see is, some of the investments of the prosumers are benefiting the system, and some of these investments are simply to push costs to the passive consumers. But they always benefit. But then if you go to the right, you see that the reactive consumer costs and prices they pay are going up if you have a lot of prosumers. So it's really a non-cooperative equilibrium where even the prosumers themselves are paying more than they would pay if they wouldn't invest, but they invest because they know that if I don't invest, my neighbors will, and I will be paying even more, right? So this is, I think, a very nice academic result of models. Then, knowing that distribution tariffs are fundamentally limited in dealing with network constraints, we moved with Atir's PhD to looking a bit more at that flexibility trade-off. And the first thing Atir did was to start from the kind of bi-level model that Tim and Niels use in their PhD. And we thought, okay, how difficult can it be to just add an option to the upper level that the DSO is not only setting the distribution tariff, but the DSO option in the upper level to curtail demand at a certain administrative determined price, right? And the first results we got were, again, surprising, because the DSO, even if perfectly regulated, meaning that he's trying to minimize the total system costs, was not using this option to curtail. And then we realized that in the PhD of Tim and Niels, we were always using a representative day, so an average day, and we were just extrapolating that to having the results in general. So, and you don't use curtailment to deal with an average day, because on an average day, you will have structural problems, and to deal with structural congestion problems, it's actually cheaper to expand the grid than to procure flexibility. So you really need a model where you do not only work with a normal day, but that you have also a critical day. And this critical day in the modeling we introduced had a lower frequency. And if the frequency is low enough, you will start to curtail on those low frequency days, because that's what you do. You build your distribution network to deal with the most dominant day, let's say, and then you might have a few critical days that are where the peaks are higher, and then it might be cheaper that you deal with those exceptional peaks by procuring flexibility. And then another thing, once we dealt with that modeling challenge, we realized, okay, what relevant debate can we contribute to with this model? And then I noticed that there seems to be a common wisdom now that flexibility procurement and tariffs are complementary regulatory tools. And we wanted to check that. Is that really true with modeling? And we did notice that they are complementary. So you will typically use both. If you give the upper level in the model the option to use both these tools, the DSO will use both tools. But we also noticed that if the tariffs become very imperfect, what you do is you create structural issues. And then it might be too expensive to solve them with flexibility procurement. So it means that if tariffs are more cost reflective, you will actually use this procurement more than if tariffs are very imperfect. So I think that's sort of, challenges the common wisdom a bit. At least for us, this was a new insight. So what am I talking about, this flexibility trade-off? Well, you might have seen the picture on the left. At least I'm using it already for a few years because it was the first study that sort of showed this trade-off, I think. And it was done within the context of Germany. And it led Germany to say we allow DSOs to curtail up to 3 or 4% of wind and PV connected to their grids, because we believe that giving the DSO that option, of course, they had to compensate the PV and the wind for that curtailment, would result in a big saving of distribution investments. Now, that picture is not complete because it's just showing the more you curtail, the more you save on investments, but it doesn't show the full cost benefit analysis, right? From a system perspective. So that's what Attir's model is now able to do. And that's why you see a picture on the right that looks a bit different from the picture on the left, where if you look at the total system welfare, curtailing, in this case, the demand side, this is what Attir focused on. In the beginning, improves the welfare, but at some point comes down, right? This is what you would expect intuitively, and this is also what the model nicely shows in that paper. To again illustrate one detail of that model, just the beauty of mathematical models, again, we found something that we were not necessarily expecting to see before we started the modeling, because we noticed that, again, the prosumer games in a quite interesting way. So if we introduce a quite high compensation for curtailment, the prosumer will anticipate this compensation and will start to play games, namely charging the battery not in an optimal way from a system point of view, but in an interesting way for the prosumer to earn more money from compensation. So this is the well-known ink deck game, right, that we know. And in action here in a very simple model with a prosumer. Then the last PhD I started with, in this case it's with Alan, is we go deeper in flex procurement. So I'm convinced now that we will see some flex procurement happening in the coming years. So then the question is how will that evolve, right? So first is we see in practice that it's already done in several countries, but the way it's done is very different. It goes from long-term contracts that are procured in markets organized by DSOs up to intraday markets, existing intraday markets, where then the DSO becomes one of the entities that trades in these intraday markets. And then, of course, the question is, should we harmonize somehow this sequence of markets, including flex markets, or do we just allow things the way they are? In the next step, we also would like to look at how system operators are competing potentially in the future. As soon as DSOs procure flex, we know that they might compete with resources with the market, but also with BRPs and with the TSO. And in that competition, there are a few details that could matter, like the fact that DSOs are now allowed to filter balancing bids. If they think these bids could cause issues in their grid, there is this whole process of pre-qualification of resources, and there is the open issue of compensation. Who will compensate who in case a certain bid cannot be activated due to distribution network constraints? So a lot of open issues, more than maybe Ellen will be able to handle alone in her PhD. We shall see, but I'm sure she will deal with some of these issues. On flex procurement, the picture on the left is from TSOs and DSOs, a taxonomy. And originally the taxonomy was saying we will either procure flex, DSOs will procure it in a separate market, or DSOs could team up with TSOs to procure flex as a kind of redispatching source at a national level in a national redispatching markets, where you could then have both TSOs and DSOs procuring the same service. Or you could even integrate it into balancing markets, because balancing markets is also about regulating upwards and downwards. So if you would add a location tag to that, you could have an integrated redispatching balancing market. Now, when we did a case study on the 3-4 most advanced flex markets, at least that was our perception, that they were more advanced. We found that Piclo in the UK is doing this model example number 1 with a separate DSO market, and they even procure it quite on a long term. So way ahead of the balancing and wholesale markets. I mean, day ahead and intraday. And then you have Enera and Gopax, Germany and the Netherlands, where you see intraday activity. And this intraday procurement was not part of the original taxonomy that the DSOs and the TSOs came up with, but it seems to be a reality, at least in some countries. So now Ellen is trying to develop a model. Well, she already has it actually. And so soon we will have some results showing how the system costs and the allocation of costs between different type of customers will change depending on the sequence you use in flex procurement. Now, to finish, I want to come back to the title. So the title was on the future of electricity markets with distribution network constraints. And I think everything I showed so far is not necessarily the end game. So the end game, I think, was discussed in Boston 2019. And Anthony, I think you were there. Tim was also there. And I was not there, unfortunately. But the one of the authors of that famous book on the left, Spot Pricing of Electricity, the Bible, you could say, for all of us, organized this event in Boston, looking to the future and saying, you know, will we have distribution locational marginal pricing? Because that's the only theoretically proper way of dealing with distribution network constraints. But then the question is, it's theoretically indeed superior, but is it practically feasible, right? So, and what I understood from that workshop and the results that were shared is that it is possible. More and more academics believe it can be done. And there is actually already some stakeholders thinking about a possible governance for it. So first of all, calculation, yes. I think everybody would agree that it will look a bit different at distribution level than at transmission level, because the network constraints are different in their physical nature. And the governance does not necessarily have to become super complex if we would go for what seems to be referred to as enhanced locational marginal prices. So you would sort of decompose the computation. You would have your locational marginal prices from transmission level, and then you would somehow in an additional computation step enhance those for distribution level. I do not know how this will evolve, but I really think we will see some form of distribution locational pricing, and it could even come in the form of zonal prices, because we're not that far from this, I think. And why is that? Well, I briefly mentioned filtering of balancing bits. If you think about it, that's the start of a kind of border that is being defined between transmission and distribution grids, at least implicitly, because implicitly the DSOs will, by filtering and excluding some balancing bits and not others from their area, they will implicitly start to do a pro rata allocation of transfer rights between distribution and transmission level. So we know from transmission level that as soon as you do that, this will be challenged, because why am I being cut and not somebody else? So the next step, the logical step, would be to start auctioning these rights, maybe first explicitly and then implicitly, and then basically we are in the same kind of process that led us to the zonal pricing we have for transmission, and then we would have it for distribution. So maybe this will come first. I do not know, but besides mathematics, I wanted to share with you that I also recently discovered the beauty of synthesis, trying to summarize everything. And as you know, we just published a book, and this is my favorite picture from that book that illustrates the sequence of electricity markets we have today in Europe. And I'm pretty sure if we will make a new edition of that book in 5 years, that this picture will be look a bit differently than the picture we have today, especially the dotted lines. The dotted lines is these open issues, right? How will flex markets and redispatching markets fit into this sequence? Today, they fit in to the sequence in a very different way in different countries. So I'm pretty sure we will still have some discussions on how to evolve in Europe. And that was it for me.
Thanks, Leonardo, for this very enthusiastic talk. So we have 15 to 20 minutes for question, actually. Anthony, maybe you go ahead first.
Yeah, thanks, Leonardo. Very nice presentation. So I think you made a really interesting remark in the beginning on one needs to choose between fairness or cost reflectiveness. Could you expand a bit on that statement?
Yes. So we noticed that it's really almost impossible now to come up with a tariff that doesn't increase the costs for passive consumers. So really, it's impossible. I mean, if they don't react, they will end up paying the others. It's almost impossible. So if we want to at least keep the system costs under control with distribution tariffs, as a consequence, it will be hard to keep the prices low for passive consumers. So
what's the notion of fairness then? What do you define as fairness?
Yeah, in the work we did, we defined fairness as, you know, if we associate passive consumers with vulnerable consumers, that being passive is not necessarily going to mean that you end up with all the costs, right? So that's how we defined it in our work. But I agree, it's not well defined in general.
No, but I just wanted to make sure to understand. So that's perfectly clear. Thanks. I can go on until other people, because there were a lot of interesting things. So can you explain the intuition of the graph on the slide of Tim and Niels, the right one? So you said that if I don't invest, then the other guy will invest and I'll end up paying even more. So what's the quick intuition behind that?
Yes, so basically what we saw there is if you have net metering, the prosumer is using the grid as a free battery, right? So the prosumer is mainly investing in PV. If you go from volumetric tariffs with you know, net metering to capacity charges, what the prosumer will do is also to start investing in batteries. But they do not only invest in batteries to create more system value out of the PV they have, they start to over-invest in batteries to push costs towards others. And others are not only the passive consumers in this case, but also the prosumers. Because if you go to scenarios where almost everybody is a prosumer, you know, you're not only pushing costs anymore to the passive ones, you're also sort of in a game, you know, it's like, you know, if you would be sure that your neighbor wouldn't overinvest in a battery, you would do neither, because you would both rely on the grid. But as you know, your neighbor might overinvest, and that will result in you paying more of the fixed cost. But this is only relevant in a scenario where all costs are fixed. Remember? So you only have historical costs. So the capacity charges can help to reduce future peaks from future EV investment or heat pumps, and the capacity charges are good at that, but these capacity charges are not good at recovering some costs, right? Historical costs, right? And if it's about historical costs, then the batteries that the prosumer install is just to avoid historical costs, is not to help reduce the system costs. And that's why this game emerges.
Okay, thank you, Leonardo. I'll also follow up with you. We have the event tomorrow as well, but maybe I leave the floor for other Q&As. I don't want to hog it, but thanks a lot.
because in general, I always like to find, even if it's in extreme scenarios, because this was only happening in an extreme scenario, but if you use bi-level modeling and you never see real cases of non-cooperative behavior, you're not using the real value of that modeling technique, right? So I am always interested in seeing this kind of extreme behavior in extreme scenarios.
The audience is a little bit shy, so I'll go forward for another one. So we mentioned network constraints, but there's some argument saying it's really difficult to estimate the parameters for the distributed network. So that means the model may be not that accurate. What do you think about this?
Yes, so the way we approached it in our modeling papers is that we said, okay, if in the upper level the DSO is taking a decision to invest in the network, but we don't really have a full network representation, we just have an investment function, right? As if the grid can just be expanded linearly. Then what we did is to say, okay, but what if in reality you would have a more complex network, meaning that the system problems are not really aligned with the individual peaks anymore. We just said, what if there is an error between the two, and we showed that as a sensitivity. So the bigger the difference between I would say the simple representation of the network and the actual network can be represented, I think, in a very simple way as saying you are partly blind, right, in the upper level. So you just include a kind of a friction factor, you could say.
Do you observe some like very strong sensitivity to this, or like minor sensitivity?
Exactly. So we included a lot of sensitivities in our work always. We like to model in a very simple way, but then admit that this simplicity implies that you need to take into account a lot of sensitivities.
Okay, thank you. So next one, Panguias, please go ahead.
Hi, Leonardo.
Hello.
It was an interesting talk, and obviously I liked more your comment on distribution, location, marginal pricing. We had some interesting discussions with Tim in the workshop in Boston. I'd like to, if you could elaborate more, how far do you think we are from actually applying potentially some two-part tariffs or dynamic pricing distribution network, whether it be in operational planning horizon or for a more planning perspective as potentially non-wire solutions to discover the value of distributed energy resources in the grid.
So I think we've started to notice that on distribution tariffs a few years ago, everybody was expecting that we would go very far in these cost-reflective tariffs. Today, I think we've seen reforms in most countries, but they are dealing with the biggest distortions. So they're sort of fixing the wrong incentives of the tariffs we had, but still trying to fix it with a relatively simple distribution tariff, right? So the level of sophistication is still rather limited, I would say. It seems to be that time granularity is politically more accepted than location granularity. So I do not know how quick that will change, but today it seems very few countries are really seriously considering locational granularity. And if you don't consider locational granularity, you should be very careful sending strong signals through distribution tariffs, right? Because they will be average signals and they might be completely wrong depending on whether in one part of the distribution grid you have injection issues with an oversupply in some hours, while in another part of the grid you might have problems with demand in completely different hours of the day. So there I don't see a lot moving. So because of the constraints in all the other options, I think at some point, people will start to seriously consider to have a more integrated approach, having distribution constraints somehow represented in electricity markets, you know, like we do for transmission constraints, because it seems that so far we're not considering that option. We're trying everything else, but everything else is we are gradually coming to the conclusion that there are strong limitations to all these alternatives. And then at some point, we will have to come back to the option you like the most. But it could start with this kind of zonal approach that I hinted to, which step?
Zonal approaches are also a good approach for providing incentives to locate to install new DRs for planning purposes.
Yeah. Indeed. But this whole planning story is only starting now. Huh? So EDSO and Eurelectric, I think, are doing for the first time a European study on multi-year horizon study on the needs for distribution expansion. And I was involved in one of the meetings to discuss the preliminary results, but they are not yet looking at the trade-off with flexibility. So this trade-off with flexibility is still really new, even for the methodology that will be used for that. So I guess it will still take a while. Huh?
Yes. But in the US, utilities are running studies to discover the value of DRs. They are they are instructed somehow from state regulators to do so whenever they consider a wire solution, to consider also an alternative with DRs. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. But and that's actually the work ATIR is now doing. So with ATIR, we are trying to also do a modeling in that direction, because the way you model it will lead to very different conclusions on the potential of flexibility. Because do you model it at a fixed cost? Do you model it as a market? Do you model it assuming you will be able to contract that flexibility at an administratively determined price, right? So that will have a big impact on the conclusions you reach on how much you will rely on expansion and how much you rely on flex, right? Yes. So there are still quite some open issues, I think, on the methodology you apply.
Yeah, I think we should take offline the discussion. I monopolized.
Okay, so we have a next question from Pawlowskaya, please.
Hi, Leonardo. Xenia speaking. Very good to see you again. It's been a while. It's great to see that your group is again doing some really exciting research. Thank you for summarizing it so nicely today. Obviously, due to my personal focus, I'm very much interested in your second part of the presentation, where you deal with on the one hand local flexibility markets, and on the other hand the approaches to solving congestion on the TSO level. And so I found that the question that you were posing together with your most recent PhD about how system cost and their allocation change depending on the sequence of procurement of flexibility, really exciting. And so my question would be what is your personal take on the whole issue of local flexibility markets? Because in my understanding, if we take that sequencing aspect into account, it means that the local market would come first, and come first both in priority. So we prioritize DSO issues as opposed to the TSO issues, and at the same time it comes first in time, obviously, because otherwise they will not have flexibility providers, for example, would not have a chance to provide their flexibility elsewhere, for example, in the intraday market or wherever. So do you think this kind of prioritization in local flexibility markets justified? And do you see any issues there in terms of gaming as well? Since to me that resonates a lot with your previous example about that prosumer with EV charging gaming because of the curtailment payments.
Yeah. So I had a bit of intuition before we started that research, but I was already a bit surprised by some of the modeling results that, changed my intuition in a way. Because often you get modeling results where you're like, this is weird. Is this a problem of the model, or should I be able to develop a new intuition for it? And I think we're going in the second direction. So what we did is to really start with an open mind and let the model speak in a way, right? And then wonder like how much of this is a result of our modeling assumptions, how much of this is a result of the case we took, because we took a case from Germany with a typical north-south congestion at transmission level, and then we looked at what if also at distribution level in the north or distribution level in the south you would have issues, and what if the DSO goes first in redispatching, then the TSO does the redispatching, and then you run the wholesale and the balancing. And then we also looked at the reverse, and we looked at the integrated. What if the integrated solution where they just procure together, right? So, and we looked at it in a perfect competitive setting, and also in a setting, and then you go to a bi-level, where in the upper level, the BRP, there is a BRP that is behaving strategically. And then, of course, the results change because the relative performance of different sequencing can change due to the market power. Because indeed, everybody talks about this ink deck game, but I've not yet seen a lot of papers that try to mathematically look at it for distribution. I've seen more papers for transmission looking at this ink deck game.
I think it just also has to do with the fact that it's where it's first been observed, so it's but also much more evident on the transmission level, obviously also for the magnitude of the event. I'm pretty sure it's also much more difficult to spot on the day-ahead on the distribution level. But then once you were testing those different sequencing options, so were the local markets, for example, performing in some shape or form better or not as compared to, for example, that integrated redispatch balancing solution or the global redispatch market?
So far, and Ellen is almost ready with her paper, so I hope we will publish by the end of the year something or early next year. But I've seen results so far that do not point to a clear winner. For the moment. So we're digging deeper in the sensitivity analysis to really understand how much of it is context specific and how much of it is, specific to the market structure. So we've noticed that can really play a big role. But we also don't want to have a paper that just says, we don't know, it really depends. So we're still trying to come to something that is more than, it depends. But it's clear that you cannot say there is one winner that will always win. That's already clear. But we're sort of in between. It depends, and there is a clear winner.
Okay, well then, very, very excited to see the paper once it's out. Thank you very much, Leonardo.
So this means then no further question, but we can take a very brief break of 2 minutes, and then we can hear the talk of Dimitri. Okay, thank you for the very nice discussion.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the second half of the session. So next speaker will be Dimitri. He joined ENGIE 10 years ago after his PhD in nonlinear optimization. He is working in the advanced analytics team of the ENGIE Impact department that produces mathematical models for different entities of ENGIE group. He is responsible for different applications based on operation research, and the presentation of today will focus on prosumers, one product for which he is the product owner. Dimitri, please.
Thank you, Yuting, for the introduction. I will share my screen so that you can see the. Could you confirm me that you see them?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So, thank you everyone for attending this presentation. My name is Dimitri Tomanos, and I will talk to you today about a tool that is called Prosumer, and that we have developed in ENGIE Impact, the department where I belong. And Prosumer is a tool that we use in our teams in order to do the sizing of decentralized system equipment. And we have that sizing tool that is used for years to support different studies that we made for different clients. And what I would like to talk to you today is how we modified the tool in order to integrate the different flexibilism that are more and more important in some countries, and that we wanted to integrate into our different studies in order to give the best to our different services. First of all, I would like to give you some word about where I am located and some words about the company. So you know the ENGIE Group, and it's a global worldwide reference for low carbon energy and services. And you see some amazing figures there about the number of employees in ENGIE, the number of revenues. So they are huge number and they are quite amazing. And just to tell to you that the ENGIE playground is a very, very good playground in which we are playing, and we are providing our services. And inside ENGIE, we have made some studies recently, and we see that globally the sustainability is now integrated into the strategy of nearly all companies. So what we see is that 85% of the companies have defined sustainability targets, or that they say that the sustainability is very important. And we see that these principles are really increasing over time. But when we look at what is the percentage of companies on track to achieve the sustainability targets, then the percentage is way lower. So ENGIE has created a company called ENGIE Impact, where I belong, and the idea of ENGIE Impact is really to work with the different companies in the world in order to accelerate the sustainability transformation and to be able to capture the value of sustainability. So different kind of services, strategy, the implementation, and integrates also financing. And the ENGIE company, we are everywhere in the world, and this allows us to really work together with the companies around the world and implement those sustainability transformation. I would like now to go deeper into the details. So I will give you some more about the context. Then I will talk to you about the Prosumer tool. I will describe the flexibility management, and I will finish by a conclusion. First, let's talk about my team. So I'm part of a team of around 60 people, which is called Advanced Analytics. And in this call, we are all convinced of the high added value of advanced analytics, machine learning, optimization for the management of the systems. But in ENGIE, we have to convince that thanks to optimization, thanks to machine learning algorithms, we are able to to help ENGIE to differentiate and to be more competitive with regard to the competition. And in our team, we have based our services on 3 pillars. So we are experts, so we have a lot of PhD in our team and we understand the business. Afterwards, we implement some prototypes and we convert these prototypes into industrialized solutions in the cloud and managing all these correctly. And thanks to this, we really optimize the business of our clients that are either inside ENGIE or outside ENGIE using these advanced mathematical tools. And I would like now to go through the prosumer success story. So we have developed a tool that is called Prosumer inside ENGIE Impact. So we have part of the team which is dedicated to consulting services, and they developed that tools in the context of some specific studies. So it's a mathematical model that they developed to answer some client questions. And afterwards, we saw that there were some interest to merge, let's say, the tool to other kind of questions and so on. And we have integrated more and more features in the tool up to a situation where the tool was really large and answer a very large number of questions. And in that context, we discussed with an organism in ENGIE Research, which is called, in ENGIE, which is called ENGIE Research, for further developing that tool. So what is nice in ENGIE is that if you have brilliant ideas, you are able to get funded to this and to deliver your services to a lot of entities in the group. And we have developed that prosumer software as a service application that we have launched last year. And it is now used in ENGIE Impact worldwide in the different countries and in different services of ENGIE. So prosumer is part of a continuum of solutions that we developed in our team. But just to, I just wanted to highlight, let's say, the big increase of interest that ENGIE has for the decentralized solution, and this is also true for our clients. And thanks to sponsoring of ENGIE Research, we were really able to go from a very small mathematical model, a very small prototype, until a real application, web-based, which is used every day by more than users. So, which is really nice. So optimization as a place inside ENGIE. Let's talk a bit about prosumer. So I have cited the name several times, but what is this tool? Well, the tool is an optimization tool. So it's based on a mathematical model, a MIP model, where we actually implement the case of decentralized solution. So we have a system based for a client and representing a client site. And we want to check what are the best equipment that may be installed for the client in order to reduce one optimization criteria. So we often base our analysis on the total cost of ownership of the system, including the investment cost for the client plus the operational cost. And what we do is that we optimize the client operation on a given period, so between 10 and 20 years usually, and we integrate into the tool all the possible technologies that may be interesting for the client. So you see the figures on the right part of the slide. We integrate a lot of different technologies, and we integrate all what we call the multi-fluid aspects for the consumer. So we integrate both heating, cold, biomass, hydrogen, electricity, and all kinds of fluids. Actually, our mathematical model is completely generic on these aspects, and this allows us to have a very flexible model that is able to manage complex decarbonization cases. But how do we do this? Actually, if you look at on the bottom left part of the slide, you see that there are the different energy fluids. And what we model actually in our tools are the conversions of one fluid into one other And afterwards, we add technical constraints on this transformation. And thanks to the flexibility of the tool, it can be done quite efficiently. And we are able to integrate quite complex constraints. So all unit commitment constraints, for instance, all the transformation constraints that you may have for a heat pump, depending on the external temperature, depending on a lot of aspects. And we have integrated all these technical constraints, and prosumer is like Lego bricks. So you take all the different equipments and you construct piece by piece your system until which you have the best possible system for the clients. And afterwards, we perform a lot of sensitivities on this system in order to provide the best possible solution. Let's go a little more into the details. So what we do is that we minimize, thanks to an optimization algorithm, the system of the user. And what we get as inputs from the users is the different energy vectors of the client. So is it considering heat, cold, or any kind of industrial processes? So we can integrate other elements like ammonia, oxygen, all these kind of stuff directly into the tool. We integrate the time horizon on which we perform the optimization. We can also model local networks, which is quite interesting, especially when we optimize territories, like small districts, for which we want to check if a local heat network is more interesting than decentralized heat generation systems. Then we can make a really a trade-off in the system and check what is the best solution with quantitative results. So we implement different scenarios in the tool and we check what are the best results from different perspectives. Then we integrate the load profiles of the clients, and we need hourly load profiles in order to check the different possible solutions. And then we have we integrate the different equipments. And we have a lot of equipment that are managed in prosumer. I don't have an exact figure, but it's really a lot of different equipment. And you have to know that ENGIE is a very large group with a lot of experts. So we have experts from different companies that are specialized into hydrogen equipment, into batteries, into solar panels, into whatever the equipment. And we have experts in every domain. And therefore, we are well connected in ENGIE in our department in order to get the data from these experts in order to integrate the tool, the best possible data to perform the simulation, so that when any user in ENGIE uses this tool, he has the best possible data to perform his simulation. And only this point is quite challenging inside ENGIE. Afterwards, we integrate also the grid connection information and the fuels. So you have to imagine that we construct this kind of system for an industrial, for instance, and these industrials are some contract, electricity contract. And what is really interesting is to evaluate what is the trade-off between investing into a local cogeneration unit and taking electricity from the grid. Or is it interesting to go for another kind of contract? These kind of questions may be answered easily in prosumer once you have modeled your system into it. And afterwards, what we see is that, of course, the different subsidies and regulatory aspects are very, very important and change everything in some countries. So we have also the possibility in prosumer to integrate all this data. We put everything into an optimization tool, and we get an investment strategy for a client. So we get what is the optimal size of the assets, how to dispatch the different assets over time, what is the different KPIs from an economic perspective, from an environmental perspective, what are the avoided CO2 emissions. And thanks to all these elements, what we are able to do, thanks to this MIP modeling with a very compelling interface, is that we are able to quantify things. We are able to check what are the results of specific possible scenarios on input data. So what is the impact if this kind of regulation appears? we integrate it into the tool, and we provide different analysis to the clients. So we, as NG Impact, we are really taking the client question and integrate it into this mathematical tool to help them to make the best possible choice for them. And in the tool, of course, we integrate the possibility to perform like a Monte Carlo analysis, to perform sensitivity on some business case on key parameters, and afterwards to have the comparison of these results and get a lot of feedback directly in the tool. And why prosumer is used? It's used for different kind of activities in the group. So in the group we have research centers, so that they work on different kind of new kind of equipment, and for this kind of equipment they use the tool. So for instance, to check when this type of new technology which is just being researched, when is it interesting? So on which kind of use cases is it interesting? Well, you can model different kind of systems in prosumer and check, okay, in this country for this type of clients, then it may be interesting. And it helps us to target the business development that we can make with these new kind of technologies. Then it's also useful for us as NG Impact for our consulting. What we do is that thanks to this digital solution, we are able to provide better consultings for our client and to construct those sustainability roadmaps for our clients, because we can define targets for CO2 reduction over time and check what is the impact on the production of some of the client and on the investment needed over time. So we integrate this into the tool. And of course, our goal is also to boost the NG services around the world, and therefore a lot of business units are using the tool in order to boost the business and to convince the end clients of the added value of the NG services for the specific needs. And thanks to prosumer, they are able to, let's say, to input all the data into the tool and evaluate quickly the different questions raised by the end clients. Some examples. Okay, in NG we are a lot of people and we are working for a lot of clients. And what I wanted to show you is that prosumer is used for different kind of problems represented in the middle of the slides. And on the left, you see some examples of use cases that we have done for local authorities. So these are very large projects for which we run prosumer. And for instance, for the first one is an eco district for multiple thousands of people, for which we detect what are the best equipment to install on site for a completely green district, and that's the same for other use cases that are represented there. But most of the use cases are not for authorities; they are for industrials. So industrials are often providing strong commitments to decarbonize and to improve sustainability. In this context, you see some example of our clients for which we perform studies thanks to prosumer. And you see that there are different kind of clients. So you see retailers, you see food industry, you see hydrogen generation, you see airplane industries, mining industry. So there are a lot of different clients that have this commitment. And thanks to a single flexible tool, we are able to provide direction for this client and a real vision to implement the commitment that they make for sustainability improvement. Let's talk about the context of the talk today, which was about flexibility management. So I hope that I convinced you that prosumer is an amazing tool. Even if you did not see it, you are now convinced that it's the best tool for NG to convince its clients and to drive better benefits for these clients. But about flexibility management, I would like to give you less commercial slides to show you what are the questions that we answer thanks to this and how do we do this in terms of modeling. So in prosumer, we have integrated what's called the reserves, so flexibility of the systems. And the reserves defined using a direction, which can be up or down, so which represent the needs to increase or to absorb excess of fluids. And in case of ancillary services, what we have done is that they offer capacity bid earnings. And we have also defined in the tool different activation characteristics. So assume that you are a very big industrials and you want to offer your flexibility to an operator, then you have different parameters on which you can play. So there is a probability to be called, which is important to consider. The duration for which the call will be made. The ratio and the earnings that you may get for this call. And we integrate all these aspects into the model to check what is interesting and what is not interesting. So the idea is really to discuss with the industrials or with the territory and check, okay, if you invest into a very large battery and you want to use part of this battery to provide some services to the network, then is it interesting? Is it interesting to oversize, let's say, the battery to provide these kind of services, depending on the region where you are located? And in some region, it can be the case. In other regions, based on some subsidies that you cannot get, it cannot be interesting. But the tool helps you to have a quantitative way to see if there is interesting or not. And in our tool, what we have done is that we have integrated reserves as alternative dispatch. So what we have is that if you look at this graph, you see that in dark blue, what we model is the production of the different assets. And what we do with reserve is that we model alternative scenarios. So what happens if I dispatch the reserve to this equipment? I have an increase, so I may have an increase of production if the reserve is activated, or I may have a decrease of production if the reserve is activated in the other direction. And thanks to this, what we want to do is provide to in the system, in the model, what are the best decisions for the production of the different assets that we will invest in that are able to manage these reserve constraints. And we see that what happens is that the reserve constraints actually stretch the solution to be able to be more flexible. You see that you have there in purple the size of the asset. So if we do not have these reserve assets, what we can have is a size which is smaller than what is displayed there. But if we integrate those reserves, we tend to oversize the system so that we are able to provide those systems. And this kind of modeling generates a lot of challenges. So we were able to integrate those reserves. We have started to work on the modeling. We have integrated the modeling, but there we started to test the tool on real use cases, and we saw that we had to adapt the modeling to integrate more elements into it in order to be able. And this is a kind of summary of what we did in order to improve the tool and to be able to manage operational use cases thanks to this modeling. So first of all, you have what we call the reserve activation scenarios. So if you look at different kind of reserves, so you have to understand that prosumer is used for different kind of fluids, for different kind of granularities, and therefore you may think about different kind of reserves that that you may consider for activation testing, for black start, for all the kind of topics. And if you simply add different scenarios one over the other, you have something that is not optimal at all from an economic perspective, because you will oversize a lot. So we have defined what is called the possible reserve activation scenarios, which are actually a kind of mapping of all the kind of possible reserves which are susceptible to be called at the same time. And actually, it will be up to the users to check what is possible, what is not possible, what is the risk that I take during my dispatch, in order to be able to drive the economic performance while keeping the capability to be called for the reserve. And the management of storages is also difficult when you think about reserves, because when assume that you have a battery that needs to be called to answer the reserve, then the battery will be used and you will have a decrease of your energy stored in the battery, and this energy need to be recovered by the system. And what we have done in order to be able to manage this, because if you just consider like average coal scenarios, then this kind of modeling does not provide very good and representative results. We have integrated into the model what we call recovery reserves. So the idea of recovery reserves is really to be able to integrate the constraints that when you are called for a reserve, you will decrease the energy stored in the storage, but after a given amount of time, this energy has to be recovered so that we are still able to answer the reserves if we are called some hours after. We also have integrated the operational cost estimation. So the idea is that when an industrial has different kind of equipment, it's important that the reserve is provided with a kind of merit order of the different equipment. And we have integrated these aspects into the modeling, which is not simple because you do not have to deteriorate the optimization of the central production scenario, but you have to consider this and much more. So we have worked this complete year on this kind of modeling to be able to provide a solution right now to the different people in ENGIE. And we are collaborating with different entities of ENGIE in order to ensure that the results that we provide with these tools are aligned with real use case application. And ENGIE is active into the management of DER, so dispatchable energy renewables. So and prosumer is used for really the sizing of those equipment for different use cases. And this is a slide with a lot of words to show you how we create additional revenues thanks to the optimization integrated ancillary services into the tool. And what I use to present these slides is a kind of 3 steps approach for different kind of use cases. I will not go through all the details, but usually it represents well how we work into our team. So what happens very often is that we are contacted with a business question. And if you take the first one, how are we able to size an asset to have always a given number of megawatts of capacity available at any time of the year? And to do this, we have to implement new features into our tool. So we are pretty sure that prosumer is the best tool to perform the sizing. And therefore, we will integrate features that are missing into the tools in order to be able to answer the question. So we have integrated several concurrent reserves. We have ensured that the solutions meet all reserve requirements. And thanks to this, we are able to manage some use cases. And we afterwards have the question about the valorization. So you know that in some countries, these kinds of services may be valorized quite interestingly. And this may make some business case doable, and if you do not consider these aspects, it's impossible to implement them. So we had to consider the earnings that you can get from the reserves, and we have integrated those kind of systems. And afterwards, we have integrated different kind of, let's say, real world features to be able to manage all these features into the tool correctly. And I wanted to be able to present you some concrete examples on which we have worked using the reserves. But the problem is that most of these use cases are done with very large industrials for which confidentiality is really key. So I have not the possibility to present in details what kind of results do we get and what does it change in practice to use this kind of constraints. And I did not want it to show a toy example because it is just not the best way to use this kind of systems. But what I can say is that, okay, we have developed a system which is called prosumer, which is widely used in NG for the sizing of decentralized systems. And we know that ancillary services is an additional revenue stream that is becoming more and more important in some regions. And we have therefore integrated this mechanism into prosumer to manage new use case for NG and its clients. And we have raised different complexities, let's say, during the practical implementation of these features. But it was possible to get rid of them and to obtain a tool that is working on real use case. And we are now using these tools on real use case with end clients, and those kind of these kind of tools allow us to provide very good results for our end client, considering this optimization of flexibility aspects. And that's all what I wanted to tell you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dimitri. So I already got a question from Anthony.
Hi, Dimitri, and thanks very much for the very nice contribution. I remember when I came to Louvain 7 years ago, the first master thesis I had supervised by Adrian Balan was co-supervised by yourself, and the topic was scheduling reserves over a long time horizon. That was a very tough large-scale MILP, and I'm wondering if any of that work has been and the software you were essentially developing at the time has evolved into this tool here, or if it's a completely separate endeavor.
Yeah. So in terms of application, it was a different, because the topic that we managed to together was linked to the management of reserves for very large power plants. And therefore, the constraints are quite different if you operate, let's say, a power plant of 500 megawatts, or if you are operating a battery of 5 megawatts. But is that the mathematical equations behind are quite the same, actually. So for sure, we have used the work, and we have integrated part of the equation into the other tool. From a mathematical perspective, it's quite the same. Even from a implementation perspective, it's different tools.
Thanks, Dimitri.
You're welcome.
Nicolas, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Dimitri, for the very interesting presentation. I was wondering, I don't know if I understand it right, but am I right to say that in the end, the tool that is prosumer tool, some of the idea is that you want to use it for different use cases that you show on one slide, like a mall center or village or things like that. And am I right to say that the idea is that you want to optimize your investment in this business use case, which ultimately the goal is to manage it as a kind of what we call smart grid, which is a kind of like operating it as an island, but on top of that you add some additional revenue stream like reserve, for instance, and auxiliary services. And if I'm right to say that, then I'm not an expert at all in this smart grid topic, but my feeling has always been like the benefits of operating a part of the grid like an island. I would mainly see this as beneficial in areas where you have very low connectivity, like I don't know very much about the African electricity market, but I guess in some part of the world like that, where you have a low access to electricity. And so I was wondering if first of all, if I'm right, and then if yes, where are you exactly selling this kind of product? Is it for business use case mainly in this kind of countries, or is it also in specific case in Europe? I know that, for instance, big industrials in Europe, like in Belgium, I think we have Calroy that for instance, a very big industrial park with many things that are working with electricity, and then they have some wind power plants and things like that. So I know that there is some big industrials in Europe as well, but I was wondering where exactly are you commercializing this tool, or yeah.
Okay, thank you for your question, Nicholas. So you are partially right. So prosumer allows to manage microgrids or mini grids for which you are completely off the grid and you have to operate the systems. And we collaborate with an entity of constructs those mini grids for some location in the world where you are completely not connected to the network, and you have to provide systems which are reliable enough to be able to face sometimes very large demand. And you have some use case there. For instance, Anglo American is a mining company located in Latin America and in Africa and also in Australia, where they have they want to decarbonize the mining activities, and they are completely off the grid. But if you look at other kind of industrials like Danone, like IKEA, like Aldi, L'Oreal, they are more located in Europe or even in Asia, and in these cases they are connected to the grid. But as an industrials, they ask themselves, okay, I pay a very large bills to the electricity generation, for the electricity generation and the transport of this electricity, and I would like to know if it is interesting to decrease my bill by investing into local equipment, local generation equipment. And in this context, what they say is that, okay, if I invest, for instance, in PV panels, okay, is it interesting to invest into PV panels? Yes or no? And what is the impact on my energy bill, my global energy bill? And therefore, you are able to create a financial discussion with them to check, okay, it will cost you, I don't know, 1 million of investments, but by 3 years, you will be reimbursed thanks to the different revenues that you will get by decreasing the cost of your energy bill. And it's true for PV panels, but PV panels, it's a obvious example. Then you may ask, okay, and for a cogeneration unit, is it more interesting to go for a biomass cogeneration unit, considering local biomass production, or is it more interesting to invest into a gas-fired cogeneration unit? And what is the impact of on my CO2 emissions? And what if I am located in France and I see the CO2 tax that is being discussed? What is the impact if the CO2 tax is at this level and at this level? So you have that tool actually to evaluate different kind of scenarios. And let's say the business of NG Impact is really to discuss with these clients and to provide them quantitative results based on specific questions and regulatory questions.
Okay, thank you. It's very clear. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we have another question from our speaker, Dimitrios, please.
Hi again. Thanks a lot for the very nice presentation. I would also like to ask a question around the industrial sector specifically, as we have also been working a few years back on a relevant European project which was focusing on industrial demand response. I think also Anna from Vito is listening, so maybe she has to add on that because it was also participating. And it's a really probably open-ended question, but just would like to hear your views. At the generation assets or explicit electricity storage, such as batteries, you have many different processes that may offer demand response potential. For example, in general, they offer some type of flexibility. And the thing is that, from what I have seen at least, there is a lot of diversity there. You have many different industrial sectors, you know, with different products, different processes. Usually some of the processes are coupled. So you have a lot of complexity and diversity. And in order to be able to analyze this in a systematic way, I don't know, probably one approach is to try to categorize these processes by using different reference models, such as, you know, shiftable cycles, heat buffers, or, for example, processes that can be fueled by two alternative fuels, basically electricity and gas, or electricity and heat. And I just wanted to ask you how complex this is in reality, since you are doing this with actual case studies, and whether you have an idea about certain, a short list of such reference processes that broadly captures the industrial flexibility potential. Thanks.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ, Dimitrios. So the answer is quite complex to this question, because from my perspective, all industrial sectors are quite different. I'm unable to provide like a global general answer, but I can tell you how we approach the problem. So what we have done is that actually what we see is that globally, if you look at, I do not know, some food industries related to the treatment of milk, then you can say that both and all the companies that are doing this are using 2 or 3 same processes. And this is true also for the mining, the copper mining industry. So what we have done is that we have done a categorization of different types of industry that are our targets. And for these industries, we are constructing kind of archetypes. So classical transformation of the industrial processes through a kind of Sankey diagram, where you see how the fluids are going in and out and how they are used. And what we do is in prosumer, we have those archetypes that are being developed in collaboration with other entities of ENGIE. And we have a good categorization that are able for which we are able to provide very good first results. And of course, those archetypes remain archetypes. So when we are approaching the client, it's good to use those archetypes to provide approximate figures. And afterwards, when we have to deep dive into one specific analysis, then we modify those archetypes into real representation of the sites. So typically we do site visits in order to get the real measurements of the different transformation, and because all the situations are different. So in some sites you may have a cogeneration unit which is 20 years old and for which the efficiency has evolved over time. So you have to do some modification. Thus, based on these archetypes, we have a very good way to, let's say, to provide first results, and this is usually the way we proceed.
Yeah, Anna, Dimitrios just mentioned, so go ahead, please.
Thanks for the answer. I'm Anna Wierak from Vito, a Flemish research institute, and Uting is my direct colleague now. And I just have a small follow-up question on the question of Dimitrios. So you mentioned you really go to the site to get the real measurements and then you model it in detail. And indeed, we did in a research project a similar thing, and our experience was that it was very time-consuming process. And then the flexibility that we found in a number of processes was relatively low, so its value was also relatively low, and in the end, the costs of our analysis were higher than what they could earn in a year or over several years by offering their flexibility. So I was just wondering whether you had any reflections on this, and how was your experience?
Of course, we do not make site visit for all analysis, and we do a site visit when it is interesting to do a site visit. When you see that, okay, some numbers are not, we are not so confident about the values that we get, and we think that there is something wrong that should be corrected. First, what we do is that we are just using these archetypes values. Afterwards, in the second time, we just contact, let's say, one local person to get the correct values. And if this is not enough, then we go for a site visit. And what is really interesting is that we have you know, the local experts of ENGIE. So if we have to do, I do not know, a site visit in Saudi Arabia, we have people there. If we have to do a site visit in Chile, we have people there. And this helps us a lot in in our organization to have people located next to the clients and for which we construct a close relationship. And when we do the optimization of one single site, we see that sometimes these site visits really provide us very, very good results for which we are able to earn more than what it costs. But it's true that the cost of a site visit it's not a topic to neglect. I completely agree with you on this point.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
And I have another question. So actually, you have this prosumer model which you can use maybe to help clients decide on investment. So it's really an investment analysis, and you maybe roll it over 20 years or so. But then at the second part of your presentation, you focused more on the flexibility, on the reserves. So it's really more about then the actual already existing flexibility. Is that a good interpretation?
Yes and no. So actually, what we do is, for sure, you are completely right. We use this tool to determine what is the optimal size of the assets, and so in order to drive for new investment into new production capabilities. But when you think about investing, you have to think about the possible costs and the possible revenues. So of course you have the investment costs for the new equipment that you want to install. There are the operational costs and the operational revenue. What we see is that in some regions, considering the revenues that you can get from ancillary services have to be considered to make your business case sustainable. So let's say assume that you want to invest into a very large electrolyzer. What kind of additional revenue you can get if you use this electrolyzer also to provide flexibility to the services? This is the kind of question for which we have, let's say, the optimization of the capex part, the optimization of the opex, and for the optimization of the revenues, then we use this flexibility.
Okay,
right?
so in sizing of the assets, you already can take into account, so to say, design for flexibility.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, yeah. Okay, thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. So we can keep other question maybe after my presentation, the last one. So I will share my screen. So today I will talk about two new pricing schemes based on non-linear pricing. So since it's pretty new, I will try to focus on the ideas and the methodology.
Your screen is not shared.
Huh?
Your screen is not shared, in fact.
Oh, okay. I guess some. Okay.
Now it's good. Now it's good, yeah. Perfect.
So I just mentioned these two pricing schemes since it's pretty new. I will mainly focus on the ideas and the methodology. For the details, if somebody interested, we can do that during the Q&A. This work actually started from the last chapter of my thesis. Then after I joined Vito, Celine, and Danielle joined the small party to do some further work. Before I really started, I guess this figure you haven't seen before in like March. During the corona, what we do is that we take some protective measures so we can make sure the number of infected cases could stay below the capacity of the healthcare system. Actually, we have a similar story in power service. This could be a typical consumption profile in your household. You have a peak and off-peak, and this is a price tariff offered by ENGIE. So we have peak hours, the prices are high, off-peak hours, prices are low. The idea is to shift this part of consumption into lead hours. But the question is this kind of tariff future-proof? So the time use tariff is designed many years ago. At that moment, the supply side of the power system is pretty stable, and the demand side can be in some way predicted. We can know when the peak, when the off-peak. But in the future, For example, in Belgium, we predict to have a lot of renewable in the future, especially wind production. Solar is still okay. We know the solar only produced during the daytime, but wind production can be very uncertain. And another example we show is in California, because of the PV panels on the rooftop, they have this off-peak hours actually just in afternoon. This gives our indication this kind time unit tariff may be not future-proof. So that's why we propose two new pricing mechanisms. So this is outline my talk. I will motivate a little bit and discuss these two models and evaluate how these two pricing mechanisms could behave. That's based on a case study on Belgium. At the end, I will give some conclusion and some direction for the future work. So the motivation is that we have more renewable now. We need to investigate into pricing scheme. And what we consider is in the future scenario, many households are equipped with PV panels. In this way, they do not have a lot of energy needs from the grid now, but the capacity needs still remain. Could due to the electrification, could due to in the evening. This calls for the careful design of electricity tariffs. And there's already some work regarding power as a service with differentiated quality. So it's not a commodity anymore, it's a service. So for example, this one, they regard electricity service as a deadline differentiate policy to use for deferrable electric loads. And another paper considers to differentiate the service based on the duration. What we evaluate in this paper is reliability different pricing, the priority service, and another one we add this duration component into it. With duration component, the pricing mechanism becomes more complex, but can we get more efficiency from it? So we want to evaluate the trade-off between complexity and efficiency. First part, I need to introduce to you what is this priority service. Still this old figure. And instead of offering you something like a time unit tariff, we offer you a price menu with different options. Each option, you have a certain reliability and a certain price. Reliability basically shows the probability you get served. So I assign different color to it. So you can call this the color power. If it's red color, it's corresponding to this option. That means whenever you want to get the power, you get served. But the green color could be like that. In the day, in 6 hours, you do not get served. But considering we have more renewable in the system, this could be related to the production of wind production or other uncertainty sources. So we have different strips. It could be the strips that are more reliable will correspond to the high prices. We only assign a certain fuse limit at different colors, so at your smart meter. But as a consumer, you can select which device to assign to each strip. Now I will illustrate a little bit how these devices could interact with the system. We have the household, there's smart meter, and in the household we have different devices could connect to different colors, and the system operator could tell you, oh, I do not have a lot of supply now, I want to tune the demand response level. So some flexible device will be cut off until the system is back to balance. And since you have the freedom to assign different colors for different devices. So if your TV was connected to the yellow color, and I'll tell you you could be cut off at some point, you can switch to the yellow color. So your comfort is still guaranteed. We also want this mechanism can also be further extended to consider duration. What I mean that already you have this different reliability level, but rather than subscribe to a certain reliability level for the whole day, the 24 hours, you could choose a shorter duration, maybe 8 hours. For example, maybe you have a PV panel on your rooftop, you do not need to have 24 hours subscription. You can do with this 8 hours. And you can actually add another slice, maybe 20 hours or 15 hours, something like that. And I will calculate your capacity based on every strip you can serve, you subscribed. And of course, the payment is also based on the price of all the strips. So I just explained what is the concept of this work. Let's carry on to the really fundamental process to design this price menu. So we have 4 modules. The first part is the household model household type distribution model, we consider different types of households. You could have PV panels and batteries. From this, we get a demand function. The demand function will be used by the producer to design the price menu, and at the same time considering the uncertainty of renewables and his conventional generator. With this price menu, the household will react to the price menu. Will select different options based on his uncertainty at home, the production of PV, and the interruption of different colors. So after making the subscription, we will evaluate the performance because we have this system level uncertainty and the local level uncertainty. We will take this moving horizon approach to evaluate if priority service and multi-level demand subscription, how they could behave differently. Since I'm not able to cover all these blocks, I will mainly focus on the menu design and the performance evaluation part. For the menu design part, since these two pricing mechanisms all belong to nonlinear pricing theory, I will introduce a little bit and then talk about the powerful feature of nonlinear pricing to deal with information asymmetry, then the modeling part to design these two tariffs. So we all know this is a linear tariff. Your payment is proportional to the quantity you purchase. In a nonlinear pricing mechanism, the most simple one is two-part tariff. So you have a subscription fee first, and then your payment will increase with this quantity. Actually, there's a textbook for nonlinear pricing, and there are two major references talking about priority service and the multi-level demand subscription. I guess we are familiar with this author, Shmoon. This year, I guess you can also ring a bell, his name, Robert Wilson, since he just won the Nobel Prize. This is because of auction theory, but maybe next year he will win another one because of nonlinear pricing. We never know. So I talked about the powerful feature of nonlinear pricing to deal with the information asymmetry. So this is a small example for this. We have the insurance taking the plane. We have the business class and economic class. If I take the flight from Brussels to Shanghai, somebody just is on the business trip. Maybe she would like to pay 4,000 euros for it since the company pays for it. I'm only on a holiday and I only want to pay 1,000 euros. So these are the private information. But now we have two different pricing schemes. If we use a uniform pricing scheme, everybody will be sitting in this business class, so it will be crowded, there's no benefits at all. But if I price the business class 2,000, economic class and 600, it will be clear. I'll be sitting here and Jesse will be sitting here. So in this way, everybody is better off. But actually, we already have similar service in electricity. For example, the time use tariff actually is differentiate consumer based on when you consume power. We have off-peak hours and peak hours. Here in priority service, we differentiate the service based on reliability. As I mentioned, the theory actually was already proposed like 30 years ago, but in the theory, there's some shortcomings. For example, the cost function is assumed to be convex. We have some non-convex costs in the day ahead, for example, startup and minimum load costs that cannot be handled. And the model is also static, so there are no coupling over time periods, for example, the minimum up down times, the ramp constraints, and the pumped hydro storage. What we propose is that a bi-level model, we can incorporate the unit commitment model into the menu design. In this way, we can capture the non-convex costs directly. We can also model this time coupling constraints. So this is the bi-level model we proposed. So we have a producer and many different types of consumers. The producer will output a price menu to the consumer, the price and reliability. And the consumer react to this price by making a subscription to a certain option. So the tricky part is that how do we design this reliability so that the capacity of the system, because you promised consumer with this reliability, you must be able to deliver it. So this is guaranteed by our constraint here. So reliability level is a function of the subscription of a certain option and the supply to this option. Another tricky part is that how do we price the reliability? So for example, if we price the red color too low, then everybody will choose the red color. In this way, it will be the same as the flat tariff. We do not have any efficiency gain. So the correct pricing of the reliability could be guaranteed by the lower level model. We also have an actual constraint here. It's the profit of the producer is optional. And then we extend it to multi-level demand subscription by introducing another parameter here. So here, this duration can be optimized, but we offer it as a parameter. So for a certain color, for example, this green color, as I mentioned, in priority service, we choose it for the 24 hours. But now I can give you an option. You can choose 1/3 of this 24 hours or 2/3 of this 24 hours. In this way, it's possible consumer could reduce the unutilized subscription because you subscribe for the 24 hours. 24 hours here, maybe you do not need to use them. And the producer could also have a better estimation of the valuation of the consumers. In the performance evaluation part, there are two tricky part. First is how we model the how do we model the interruption pattern and the local uncertainty. Another is how the system uncertainty could interact with local uncertainty. What we propose here is the scenario tree. The scenario tree represents the uncertainty in the household. There are two sources of uncertainty. First is the high or low of the PV production. Another is the interruption of different colors. For example, this node represents the low PV production. Red, yellow, green color are all served. And this node represents the high PV production, only red color is served. With this node and based on this person menu, we can calculate the reliability of each node. This part I will not go to details. Now let's move forward to the interaction of the uncertainty. We have, as mentioned, we have system level and local PV level. But what we know is that the interface between the producer and the household is only the service contract. The producer will react to the net demand of the households, and at the same time, he needed to consider the system level uncertainty. And the households will react to the interruption of different colors at the same time the local PV uncertainty. We, at each step, the household will optimize until the end of the horizon. But at each step, we also move forward one period to simulate this rolling horizon approach. Now let's turn to the case study part. In this case study, we consider a forward-looking scenario of 2050, and we work with 8 different days. These days are the weekday and weekend in each season. We only split each day into 6 4-hour blocks. So let's see what the future will look like. So it is expected that in 2050 we do not have nuclear, but a lot of gas units. At the same time, a lot of wind and solar production. Regarding the demand side, it's expected we will have a 37% of increase, but the import remains stable. This is system level. Regarding the household level, they could be installed with batteries. There could be large battery, small battery, and we consider different household types. That type are differentiated based on 3 categories. So we have the peak demand. It's in the daytime or in the nighttime. Do they have a PV panel or not? And do they have a battery? If they do, if the battery is larger one or smaller one. Based on the methodology we proposed and this data assumption, we designed these 2 pricing menus. For example, the left side, we see the priority service menu. You have a different reliability corresponding to a certain price. And if the reliability is low, the price is also lower. In multi-level demand subscription, each reliability, we assume the reliability level is the same as the priority service. This way we get a more concrete comparison between them. And we offer different durations. And if it's the 100% duration, the price is also the same. So you can see in these 2 pricing menus, the difference is that in multi-level demand subscription, we offer the actual options like these two, and these two. These options have shorter duration compared with this option. So let's see the results. The first results from the system level, we want to compare the operational efficiency. You see, here the supplied energy. We compare these 2 different mechanisms. The supply energy actually and the multi-level demand is high, but the cost is slightly lower. At the same time, the shortage cost, or you see the discomfort of the household, actually significantly reduced. If you take a look at the producer revenue, actually we also have slightly high producer revenue. So this shows us that multi-level demand subscription could be beneficial for both the producer and the household because it can do a better differentiation. Now let's see the service and the different policies, how the households will experience this service. What I plotted here, you see the total subscriber capacity of the 8 different types of households. And the dark colors show multi-level demand subscription. We see that the dark colors are always longer than the light colors. This shows that and this pricing mechanism, the household actually subscribe more capacity. This capacity means the peak capacity because multi-level demand subscription offers the consumer the freedom to choose these shorter duration options. On the right side, what we see is in terms of energy. Still, we have these 8 households, but you see, even though in priority service we have lower capacity, but actually the total subscriber quantity is high because you always subscribe for the whole duration. And the subscriber quantity are high, but it's not likely they are all used. So on the figure on the right side shows how much of the energy is really used by the household. Whether we can see that in multi-level demand subscription, even though your subscriber energy is lower, but actually what is used is high. So the percentage utilization ratio is high. Now let's tend to see how the storage could have an impact on the demand for capacity. Here still we have these 8 households, this and priority service. Different colors show the different options. We compare household 6 with 4. You see the difference is that in 4 we have a small battery. So after installing the small battery, the total capacity decrease. The red color decrease, and at the same time we could subscribe a small amount to the green color. That's understandable since when you have a battery, you are able to store the energy in the battery and then discharge when you do not get enough supply. And if the battery going larger again, the red color getting shorter again, and the unreliable options getting more capacity. And if we take a look at the second pricing mechanism, actually we observe a similar trend, but the major difference is that we get more more green colors compared with the priority service. Now let's see how the PV panel will behave in this pricing mechanism. So this is priority service. We are really interested in these 2 households. So you see they do not have a battery. They have the net tariff, but household 6 installed a PV panel. Even though he has a PV panel, but the total cost, you see the total cost is almost identical. That means household 6 installed a PV panel without much benefit in terms of the costs. Why this happens? Because the priority service is a purely capacity-based tariff. Even though you have a PV panel you can produce in the daytime, but during the evening you still need to draw power from the grid. And considering your peak is in the night, so the PV panel does not work well to reduce the net peak. And the local storage could also behave differently and different policies. So on the left side, we compare household 1 with 3. You see the difference is that number 3 has a small battery, number 1 has a larger battery. Then the cost, of course, is as expected. The cost of by installing a larger battery will decrease, and if you have no battery, the cost further increase. And in multi-level demand subscription, we have a similar trend, but still I need to remind you to see these 2 households. This 1, 5, 3, you see the cost saving by installing the battery is this big, but in priority service, the cost saving is much bigger. This shows that under different pricing mechanism, the benefits brought about by the local storage could be differ a lot. And now let's overview of the total costs. First, we take a look at these 4 households. The property are that they do not have a battery. When they do not have a battery, you see the cost actually differ a lot. But these 4 households, you see the bars, they are almost identical. This shows that if you do not have a battery, you can be better off and multi-level demand subscription. But if you have a battery, it seems the two pricing mechanism does not matter so much. So that's a lot of bar plots. Now I would like to draw the conclusions. So firstly, from a system level, in terms of operational efficiency, the utility could supply more energy to the household at a slightly lower cost, and the service inconvenience is reduced. In terms of service, so under multi-level demand subscription, you can subscribe more capacity. That means you are allowed the high peak capacity actually, but the subscriber energy is less. Even though the energy is less, you can better use this part of energy. And for the costs, if you have a battery, it does not matter much which service you choose. But if there's no battery, the cost saving by multi-level demand subscription is more significant. Now we are still trying to further polish the model. For example, as I mentioned in this current model, we only have 6 blocks, 6 periods for 1 day. So it's basically resolution 4 hours. Now Danielle and Celine are working on to make the model into a 15 minutes resolution. Of course, with this resolution, the stages will be 96 stages, and it will be much difficult to solve. What they are working on to use SDDP to solve this model and use SDDP to estimate the value function of the households. Another interesting direction is the home energy management system. So in our household, actually, we do not care about how the electricity consumed. What we care about is if the service delivered or not, if my clothes are washed, if the water in my water heater is hot or not. So it's possible in the future we could have this kind of management system based on machine learning or optimization models to help us to optimize the consumption of electricity. Besides what we have been working on, there are all the other projects related to priority service. For example, Anthony has this ERC funding, and priority service will be a big pillar of it. And there's a SMART project in the US. They are trying to implement a priority as a small test in PGM. So these are the two major references for this presentation. And if you are more interested in the details that's already in my PT session, you can take a look at. Yeah, that's be it. Thank you.
So thank you very much. So we have around 10 minutes for questions, so you can go ahead.
This is a very new concept, but in the future, I guess you will see this a lot.
You think maybe I can bring up one for the? There's an echo. You can mute yourself.
Okay.
So just to warm up the discussion a bit, the higher time resolution that Celine and Danielle are working on, extending your work on, has it brought any changes in the main conclusions? And also, are you able to make specific statements of whether it's worth investing on batteries depending on the tariffs? So you're on mute now.
Back to your first question for the 15 minutes resolution. There are some similar observations. It's not quite it's at this stage, it's not super clear if all the conclusion will be the same, but I suppose there could be some impact. For example, when you have a 15 minutes resolution, the demand profiles of the households and the production profile of the renewable could differ a lot, actually. And regarding the investment, I did some analysis. Actually, I didn't show it here. For the investment, these are investment into batteries. So what I show here is that these are cost. So these are the benefit of priority service. These are benefit of multi-level demand subscription. I show a range because here the cost of battery is showing a range. So if for the larger battery, it's most likely we're not able to recover the cost. But if we have a smaller battery in priority service, it's most likely we can recover the cost because, as I mentioned, the cost saving by installing the battery is bigger and the priority service because in multi-level demand subscription, we offer this shorter duration. In some way, it can replace or as an alternative of the behavior of the battery because you offer this short duration. It can cover some part of the energy served by the discharging of battery.
Okay, thank you, Yuting.
So we have a question from Leonardo. So.
Yeah, so thank you, Yuting. I think this subscription model is very appealing conceptually. It's nice that you worked on it. I wanted to ask you if, so if you look at grid access, some people talk about non-firm grid access contracts, which would give DSO the option to curtail people for a certain volume or for, I've not yet seen the same idea as you propose, that you do not, that you would limit the number of hours in which, you know, you could be curtailed, but you seem to use the same concept to deal with reliability, right? So it would not, so it's a kind of limited market access almost. And I wonder if you thought about how they would interact, this non-firm grid connection and this non-firm delivery kind of from a retailer contract. So I don't know if you thought about that.
I think there's some similar. I mean, the contract you mentioned, they curtail based on energy, but the first one, priority service, especially, we only curtail the capacity. It's like we interrupt you, but we only interrupt part of the service, part of the access service to the grid. This are random. It's not based on the energy. But if you turn to this multi-level demand subscription, we have this duration concept. So in this way, actually, you already have this energy component. So in this service, we interrupt you based on two criteria. First, if the color what is the color? So if at some point the green color will be interrupted, so you do not have access for this amount of the capacity. At the same time, so because this duration, you have this, actually you already have this energy limit. So when you consume all the credits, it's like a credit, like our cell phone, you have this calling credits. When all the credits are eaten up, you also be denied to the grid by this color. So again, this part is also similar to this grid access contract.
Okay, thank you.
So apparently there are no other questions. So Yuting, I will let you close the session.
Okay. Good. So we still have 2 minutes to smile. So I would like to thank all the speakers and all the lovely discussion from the audience. And I conclude this session. I'm looking forward to the session in the afternoon. Thank you, everybody.